Welcome all. My name is Sabina. I'm the head of EU and trade policy at techUK, so I do all our international work. I also run this series of webinars internally with my amazing colleagues from all across the programs at techUK. We've started them in April, and we are looking at basically the role of tech in the various sectors of the economy and society as we kind of move forward to the kind of aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you're here for the first time, welcome and come back. We are discussing very, very interesting topics every week. If you've been here before, welcome back. Today we'll be focusing on the emergency service and the justice system. And for that, I'm very happy to pass on to my colleague, who a lot of you will already know, Georgie, who's our program manager for the justice and the emergency services. Georgie, over to you.
Morning, everyone, and obviously, thank you for joining us this morning. As Sabina just mentioned, I am the Justice and Emergency Services Programme Manager here at techUK. Delighted to see so many of you have dialed in on this sort of lovely sunny Friday morning. So this morning you'll hear from members and stakeholders from across both the emergency services and justice space, looking at what the future of our public safety services might look like in a post-COVID world. We'll be exploring what we've learned from the response to the current health crisis, what worked well, what were the challenges, but also looking ahead, how has the impact of the health crisis affected the crucial delivery of public safety services. So you'll hear hopefully some use cases, best practice directly from our speakers, and then this will follow a discussion and live Q&A with yourselves. So just a few housekeeping rules before we get started. Please do make sure you're on mute for the duration of the webinar. And if you do have a question, please can you just pop it in the chat function, and also include who the question is directed at. So the Justice and Emergency Services Programme for 2020 and 2021 is focusing on the future of public safety services. This was set prior to the health crisis and is important to consider more so now more than ever. So to introduce our speakers before they give their opening remarks, we have Wahid Salim, who is the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for West Midlands Police. Wahid has worked across the public, private and voluntary sectors regionally and nationally. He works with a range of organisations and individuals providing support and advice on organisational change, governance, business development and strategic management. Natalie Coton is here from IBM. She is the Client Executive for the Home Office and UK Police, responsible for IBM's law enforcement strategy. She is actually also the Justice and Emergency Services Management Committee Vice Chair. So Natalie's been with IBM since 2014 in a number of roles across the business, including a 2-year secondment at one of IBM's leading UK business partners. She's led various initiatives across policing and actually co-created the IBM and Police Secondment Programme. Then we'll have Justin Day. So Justin is the CEO and co-founder of Cloud Gateway. He has over 17 years of experience in IT, working exclusively in networks and security, and has extensive knowledge in cloud computing. Previously, Justin has worked for major corporations, including Aviva and Vodafone, where he was responsible for their IT network infrastructures. And then finally, technology permitting. So I've just heard from both Marcus and Tim that they're struggling to get online at the moment. So I'll drop them a note. But Marcus is the project lead within the JSARC team, which is the Joint Security and Resilience Centre across the Office for Security and Counter-Terrorism at the Home Office. Marcus has been working on the post-COVID response, covering the security sector and publicly accessible locations. And also joining us is his colleague, hopefully, Tim Fleming, who leads on security and policing, borders and their work across HMPPS. Okay, so enough from me. I'll now hand over to Wahid, who will start our opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgie, and it's good to be here today to talk through the issues around technology. To start off with, just say West Midlands Police and West Midlands Police Crime Commissioner for the last 5 years had embarked on a program called WMP 2020 with our partners Accenture. That enabled us to develop new technology and use IT to create efficiencies in the way we deliver policing services. And we were already embarked on that journey and about to finish some of those programs when COVID struck. And we were, in essence, in one way, fortunate that we had already invested in our technology and our infrastructure to enable our officers and staff to be able to work from home and more remotely, so they didn't have to come into buildings or police stations to be able to conduct the work. So over the since COVID hit us, we had rolled out 1,000 additional laptops over and above what we were planning on doing, which enabled people to do, for instance, our response officers who were self-isolating, they were able to log on and do witness statements or other work without having, because they weren't able to go out and patrol, even to an extent that because of the technology that we put into our contact center where people ring in initially, some of our staff were able to continue to work and take calls from 101 at home, which on a limited function, they couldn't do everything, but at least they had some ability to carry on doing the work. We also had invested in a live chat, and we had and we actually have a chat bot doing some of that. So again, enable people to utilize technology to contact the police as well. And some of our staff who were self-isolating from the force contact center were able to do live chats through their laptops and continue to work around that. And again, quite a number of officers were able to do a lot of the frontline work on the street without having to come back to the force or to buildings, which reduced the risk for COVID. So even to a point where we had rolled out these map books, which are basically connected in with our with the handheld devices, which enabled the officers to take witness statements and actually write up witness statements rather than having to go back to a police station. We have a number of apps that we have rolled out, including the PNC app, and a lot of the forms that the officers have to fill in are all now online and can be accessed through the mobility device, and therefore reducing increasing efficiency, but reducing the need to go in. One of the things that was quite innovative, which we did rapidly, was we had one of the mortuaries, the stand-up mortuaries that we had to stand up just for in case of excess deaths at the NEC. And our in-house app team were able to develop a mortuary app across different agencies. So the ambulance service, the fire service, and funeral directors were able to access the app. So if in unfortunate situations where they had to go and pick or go and look, had to go to someone's house where people were either died in the community, they were able to put on the app all the information so that all the organizations could see what was going on and can update the bereaved families as well without having paperwork, etc., which again reduced the impact of COVID as well. And the other thing that's done on a wider criminal justice system was video-enabled justice. So all remand hearings were able to be done over Skype in a number of police stations. So again, reducing the need for individuals having to go to a court for remand hearings that could be done in police stations and custody blocks through the internet. So I just giving you a kind of an overview of what we had done and what we were able to do and how we were able to respond to the COVID situation. And because of that infrastructure investment that we did, enabled us to do things which we definitely would not have been able to do had we not had that investment in place.
So I think it's my turn now, is it? Thanks.
Yeah, over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Wahid. So good morning, everyone, and thank you, Georgie, for the introduction. Really happy to be here, so thank you for the invitation. So it's been an interesting few months, hasn't it? Everyone has had to adapt both in their personal lives and professionally. Personally, that feeling of having to adjust to working from home 5 days a week and no longer being able to have those face-to-face meetings or interactions definitely took a little time to get into a new routine. Everyone's circumstances are different, but still we've all been on our own journeys and have had to adapt accordingly. For the majority of the tech industry, so most people on this call, remote working isn't new to us. So most of us hopefully had quite a nice setup at home already. So perhaps not such a drastic change. What he's mentioned about the remote working within his force, but we know that, you know, the majority of police officers can't do their jobs from home. However, some of them can. About 10% of police force staff are currently working from home. But it wasn't necessarily an easy transition for all. Some forces initially struggled to do this due to having the right technology set up and working. The majority seem to be there now and have something in place to enable those virtual meetings, but it's a huge cultural shift, and I really do hope that it will be something that will be carried on. I've been having various conversations with the forces about remote working, and some of their questions are actually quite alien to me, such as, how do you trust that your staff are actually working? And that really highlighted to me the element of trust that is required. And it really made me appreciate my own employer to enable me to have that work-life balance that is so important for all of us. So I really do hope that post-COVID, remote working will be encouraged and will continue. We know there's huge benefits, you know, the monetary element, so, you know, saving money on travel expenses, mileage. We know that senior leaders spend a lot of their time traveling the country, so perhaps it will be reviewed. But picking up on that work-life balance, we all probably take it for granted, but police officers and staff members could really benefit from having that flexibility so that they can balance their other domestic personal activities. So that leads me on to the more emotional aspects that probably need to be considered in a world post-COVID. Police have been focusing on the practical aspects, so not just remote working, but also automation, cloud, cybersecurity, to name a few, and I'm sure we'll cover them on this session today. But there's also that emotional side. People are have to consider their safety when going to work now. Now, as a police officer, there's always a risk, but now there's an additional pressure because it's not just their own safety, but also that of their families and the risk of taking the virus home with them. As he mentioned, you know, there potentially has been an increase in sudden deaths due to the pandemic that police officers have been exposed to, and potentially losing their own loved ones and colleagues. So I think police forces, and they are, but will continue to need to monitor the welfare of their police officers and staff and make sure that's in place. And potentially a topic for conversation is how technology can support to do that. And then my final remark is, how do police officers or police forces manage if there's another spike further down the line towards the end of the year? In terms of having to self-isolate, so because they themselves have symptoms or someone in their household does. In the first month of COVID, I was working with a particular workforce who had a quarter of their staff self-isolating. So the immediate problem was, right, remote working, because if they're not ill, they're just with someone who's got symptoms, they could still work. So that was a huge problem. But actually, if police officers are self-isolating and can't serve on the front line, all of a sudden they've got a huge problem on their hands. You know, certain tasks are having to be deprioritized due to having other focus areas, but those tasks still need to be done. So the experience that we've been having is seeing a huge interest in automation. Police forces are looking at areas where the work is rather repetitive, and understanding and finally getting their heads around that perhaps a digital worker could do that work, and then it frees up the human worker who is well and able to work to do more of those value adding activities. So I mean, that's probably all I wanted to say. But I mean, one thing's for sure, the police do know how to act in a time of crisis. However, I really do hope, and I think an area for improvement is the more long-term planning. And I do hope the last few months have provided police forces with an opportunity to learn and apply those changes that can provide some long-term benefits. So I think I'm handing over to Justin now. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me? I'm conscious that I'm on Norfolk broadband.
Yeah.
Excellent. Series of nodding heads. So yeah. So look, what I wanted to talk about is this. You know, COVID is this obviously this topic that is rife for conversation at the moment for everyone, culturally, health-wise. People on beaches, people shouldn't be on beaches, all sorts of things, and it's made us think. But for the you know, what we do at techUK, we look at the role of tech here in the future of emergency services and justice and all of these good things. Has COVID fundamentally changed what we were doing, what we were looking at? I think the answer is no, right? And I want to explain why I'm saying that. I don't think that fundamentally what we're trying to do, how we're trying to do it has changed. I think it would be very easy to look to this as, oh, everything needs to change because of this. So let's just ratchet that back a second. You know, technology is an enabler for business outcomes, okay? And I think we really need to keep focused on that. Business outcomes, in this case, the emergency services or the justice system. And I think looking at technology in that way hasn't changed. COVID hasn't changed that. What it has done is made us look at the speed of adoption of those services, okay? Now, I think a lot of the things that have come out of the last few months are actually things that we were looking at doing anyway. And I'm going to come to a couple of those and give you some examples of the things that we've been getting involved with. And I think what's happened is they have been accelerated. They have been accelerated because they are a necessity, and necessity often is the mother of innovation, or so we're told. I think one of the things we need to be careful about as well, and this is why I'm saying let's be mildly cautious about running away to, oh, we need all these new things, is getting caught up in hype technology. Something that I like to talk about a lot because I think it can be quite worrying. What we've got here is we need to look at fundamentals. We need to look at the fundamentals I believe we were doing anyway, maybe not at the right pace. We just need to be careful what we're looking at for the right reasons. What COVID has actually made us look at, and of course I come from a network background, so I look at technology from a foundational level, is getting those foundations in place and making sure that they're right before we look at all the really exciting things. You know, the things that have been most important to health, to the emergency services, to the justice service, to many businesses in the private sector as well, is simply functioning. You know, all at once we've had to send everybody home, and we've suddenly had a chance to look at whether we seriously considered the impact of running a business continuity and disaster recovery scenario that was sending 100% of our workforce home, some of which don't have mobile tech, some of which don't have access to the internet, some of our services aren't available, etc., etc. Okay, so it's those things I think that it's given us a real chance to look at and to accelerate and bring forwards. So let's look at a few examples of things that we've been doing, and something I'd like to really focus on that's been really interesting. So like I said, I come from a network background. More often than not, I'm going to look at connectivity, I'm going to look at security, I'm going to look at things like that. But something that's been of the most interest to me over the last few months, and something that we've been helping with greatly, is that remote working. And what is remote working? I don't think there's a concept of remote anymore. Remote kind of infers that you're not at where base is. Where is base? I've sat here for the last, keep a tally, this is day 105, sitting in well, you can see the pinball machines behind me, in my, let's call it an office. And actually, our business has functioned perfectly, if not better. So there's not this concept, is where do I work? The solution that I think has really come to the fore that is somewhere we were going, but now is being considered much more quickly, is VDI, is the concept of what does remote truly mean? Remote is making use of the technology that allows me to get into what I need but being able to be anywhere in order to consume it. And that's what's been interesting for us. When we see the health service, for example, what we see on the television and in the media, and rightly so, is the frontline workers. And that's fantastic. That's what we should be seeing, and all of the positive work done there. But the NHS employs 1.5 million people, and the significant majority of those guys are back office staff. So as soon as you send them home, these are people that are used to working on desktops, on terminals. They go home, they still need to function in order to support the front line, but they now no longer have access to services, to NHS services, to NHS networks. And we've worked with, you know, the big hyperscalers, the likes of Amazon, the likes of Microsoft, in getting those VDI farms, those VDI solutions spun up exceptionally quickly, working with the end users, then pulling them securely back through an agnostic system that allows them to connect to what they need when they need it. And I think that is somewhere we were going to. I think would have been 3 to 5 years away from a significant maturity. It's that I think we're going to see exceptionally accelerated, not just because there could be a second spike. That would be a wonderful use case, but it's about really now looking at the impact of, you know, no one's given an opportunity to send everybody home all at once. And we've had that opportunity. And I think Natalie mentioned it, this is a cultural shift. This is not just a technology shift. If it's a technology shift at all, it's about that mindset that people now are looking at remote. Like I say, I'm trying to get rid of the word remote and seeing that as normality. Actually, this works. It works really well. We just need something that truly underpins that and allows that. For how we can bring that into emergency services for the better, for now, but also in a post-COVID world, which we all dream of, that will come back someday, I'm sure, is, you know, the word collaboration is thrown around cheaply. What I think we need to really start to impress is how you can have regional business consideration whilst having national foundations that allow you to work. For example, if I was overlaying police forces on that, for an example, we can have a set of national infrastructure and foundations that still allows regional police forces to operate within region. So all of the data is shared, the connectivity is shared, it's secured, all of those things can still function. But that's where I think we need to start to work more efficiently and together. And I think actually COVID has presented us with a lot of opportunities to do that. So I look forward to the discussion from here on in. I'm going to need guidance on who I'm passing to from Georgie.
Yeah, so I think Marcus has actually joined via telephone. So if he is with us, it'll be over to Marcus, who hopefully is here. Or not, potentially. Marcus, are you on the call?
Hello, Georgie.
Hi, yeah.
This is Tim speaking.
Hi, yeah. Is Marcus on the call as well?
Well, Marcus said he had dialed in. I do apologise. Clearly, picking up on the points that Natalie and Justin have just made, harmonising of different video conferencing systems across government and across the wider emergency services, can be one of the more practical things that happens as a result of COVID-19, because clearly Skype for Business isn't compatible, or certainly the Home Office's Skype for Business isn't compatible. I've dialed in on home IT, so I do apologise, and I'm still struggling with the video bit, because it won't allow my picture to come up unless you can see me. I don't know. No, okay, I apologise for that. Hopefully Marcus will be sorting his audio bits out, but just to sort of, by way of introduction, Marcus and I both work for the Joint Security and Resilience Centre, which is part of the Office of Security and Counter-Terrorism within the Home Office. And just sort of from a more national perspective, picking up again what the previous speakers were saying, it is very clear that government will be looking post-COVID-19 at some very different ways of working. We are all across government being actively encouraged to look at new ways of working. The home working that we've described earlier has very much been adopted and accepted. And I think for those of us that were regular travellers into London, we never saw or foresaw that this opportunity would come around. So I guess if there was anything that comes out of the activities, it's the ability, and it's going to be the moving forward of IT systems and connectivity across government, and with a lot wider sort of law enforcement and external stakeholders that we all engage in. JSOC, the Joint Security Resilience Centre, is a sort of a cross-government department focusing on security challenges that government have, which obviously includes the emergency services. We don't have any active projects directly with the police service or the blue light services, but we're doing a number of different pieces of work with other frontline people within the border security. So Border Force are one of the organisations that we're working closely with, and with the Ministry of Justice we have a number of projects, and I've worked and delivered a number of pieces of work with them, all in the digital space, all looking at contactless types of scenarios, primarily with Border Force for actually speeding up, initially for speeding up access and the travellers' return to United Kingdom, people travelling to the United Kingdom. But obviously more recently that's taken on a completely different aspect, because we're trying to avoid contact as much as possible with people travelling. So we're now looking at ways that technologies primarily developed and used in the air travelling industry can be used more widely for all people travelling to and from the United Kingdom, but that avoids contact with passports and other forms of security. So there's some interesting activities taking place with Border Force. There's a major piece of work which people may be aware of within the Ministry of Justice, the Major Security Investment Programme, and again, there's been very little in the media about the prisons, because clearly prisoners have had to lock down virtually 24 hours a day during the COVID crisis. But we've been doing some work with that Security Investment Programme with the Ministry of Justice in that digital field that's going there. One aspect of work that we have been working with, and thankfully through this COVID-19 crisis, we've seen quite a dramatic drop, was knife crime. Obviously, those directly involved in policing, this was had become a real problem and also a priority, certainly for the Home Office. And I know the police service have some serious issues and are looking for some really sort of effective solutions and longer term work that potentially could be used. We've been working with some of the technology suppliers and looking at standoff detection techniques, etc. Screening for bulk objects and things like that. But clearly, we've also now seen some opportunities for adapting that for screening of people travelling. So again, there was certainly some interest in screening passengers for temperature, for example, people travelling to and from the United Kingdom. There is some debate as to the effectiveness of that, but it is certainly seen as a deterrent and a protective measure that would reassure the public. So that is something that, again, we are looking at and looking at taking further with those responsible for protecting our borders. So that gives you a little bit of a flavour of sort of where government and certainly the Home Office is coming from. And maybe Marcus is now up there because he was going to talk a bit more specifically about some of the work that we're doing in publicly accessible locations, also known as crowded places. So I'm not sure, should we see if Marcus is there?
Yeah, hopefully you'll be able to hear me now.
Ah, great.
Perfect. Thank you, Tim. You covered the introduction I was going to do, which is good. And I must hold my head in embarrassment that we're talking to so many people from a technical background and can't even get our government IT to work. So my apologies for that. Just quickly, I've been working on publicly accessible locations, reopening everything from Premier League grounds, airports, right down to smaller places where crowds, queuing, etc. will happen. That's a cross-government piece of work headed up by Head of Counter-Terrorism Policing, involving lots and lots of people from different organisations. The key thing for us was to go out to industry, go out to the man guarding sector, the venues, see what problems they were having, what challenges they were facing outside of the obvious ones that this horrendous pandemic has brought. The key findings of that in the initial stage are that we need to engage our non-traditional technical partners to look for solutions, and that could be everything from standoff screening, low contact searching, at a multitude of venues, from everything from places of worship down to Legoland, and looking at some of the kit that we use in regulated spaces, and being able to lessen the cost of that through market engagement, but also look at government side, what we can do to unpick some of the policy issues with that, some of the issues around GDPR and lots of other stuff with X-raying individuals as they walk through tunnels and stuff. So a really interesting piece of work that's across the board seen as an opportunity from COVID-19 to be able to increase security, but make it a lot less obvious, not necessarily having to have somebody with an SIA license searching every single bag when you go into a music festival or go see a comedy venue in wherever you may go to watch that. It's ongoing. We are trying to bring it into business as usual and look to learn from some of the issues we're having to make this area easier, which in supports our emergency services and allows a lot more low or no contact security and various other bits and pieces that happen around publicly accessible locations. Thank you, and I think that's me handing back to you, Georgie.
Thank you, and yes, no, thank you obviously to our speakers. We have got a few questions coming through now. Just a reminder, if you do have questions, please do pop them in the chat function. Sort of now's your best opportunity. But essentially what we'll do is we'll have a bit of a discussion and we'll use some of what's been discussed to shape that. So it's interesting that we've spoken about remote working quite a bit. And looking at how has COVID actually changed what we were specifically looking at. And I guess, so we know that forces have been able to sort of utilise technology and laptops and work from home remotely. But what about those functions within the justice system and policing, so specifically relating to frontline officers? Have we seen an impact on them? And actually, what new technologies do we think are out there that could further support frontline officers and the delivery of public safety services? So that's sort of a broad question across the panel. So obviously between the five of you, do feel free to jump in. So looking at new technologies and supporting those frontline officers.
Shall I just come in very quickly, if I may, Joy? So there is a number of technology that is being rolled out to policing to enable them to work more efficiently. I did mention a few, but one of the things that, for instance, that can really help that we have rolled out is fingerprint technology, where we can get a fingerprint of an individual and on a device that's linked to the mobile phone. On an app, and that then gets the person is searched, the database are searched to ensure that it is the right person, and the ID is verified of that person. Is one example of technology being used on a frontline level, and PNC checks, for instance, is another one. You know, the usage of the airwaves has now reduced quite significantly, so officers aren't having to use the airways to try and get the information. They can get the information right there at that point of the interactions with the members of the public, so that they can utilize their time more efficiently. And so there is that technology there. There's others that we can be doing more effectively, in terms of searching for individuals. We've put in new technology for our call centres, the one they're sending jobs out to officers. Officers can get a lot more of the information before they go to a job. So the warning markers, etc., can be searched on the way to a job, rather than having to go somewhere and not being able to have the full information available. There's also remote dispatching as well. So the technology can actually dispatch the nearest person with the right appropriate skills to an emergency. So those are the things that can be done and put in place to enable frontline officers to have more effective technology, but also utilize their times much more efficiently, and have a massive impact, hopefully a better impact on the public.
Thank you. Did anyone else from the panel want to add anything onto that? Expand?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I mean, my speciality is not going to be the edge technology for policing, but I think, building on what I said earlier, I think it's about what we can do that is laying the foundations of simplicity for then building those things on that can improve. So for me, for example, I know there's always going to be various contention around things like body-worn cameras, but there are a lot of very positive cases for where that should be used and why that should be used. Now, why something like that kind of appeals to me is that at its crux, it is what it is. It's basic. It captures. It securely goes back to where it needs to go to its stores. What I really like, though, is the ability for us to build upon that. And it might sound a bit futuristic, but I think that's where we should kind of take where we can, let's not strategize it, but let's think. You can start to build in some very interesting thing around AI and machine learning. You can start to build in crowd control. You can start to build in, all based off of what is being pulled back via a body-worn camera. Now, I'm not going against what I said earlier, where I said we shouldn't get absorbed in hype tech. So let's not get too excited about that. But what I like is the idea of something that starts as a basic concept that we get right. We get it foundationally right as a camera, just like a dash cam, except it's a police officer in our car. Just get those basics right, and then the ability to build and test on top is really, really positive. And I think that's something that we're seeing an increased need for, knowing that there's always a cultural contention around that, but it's nice to see that something like that, the foundations are being done in the right way. For a good example of, we're not running to the end before we've got the start looked at. And yeah, we've been speaking with a couple of forces. Again, I'm going to hold my hands up, so that's not my specialist subject, but very specifically about body-worn camera, about storage of data and how that's looked after, and then ultimately how that is post-processed, as well as looking at current process, i.e. looking at exactly what's happening now versus being able to look back on that data as well. So yeah, interesting times, but I'm seeing things that are being done the right way, built from the foundation.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Wahid. We're actually starting to get some questions in through, which is great. So one question we have here for Wahid is, with the technology you spoke about being used during lockdown, how will you manage the cultural challenge from people returning to work, and what will your new normal be?
Thank you. And the great thing about it, as I said, is quite a number of this technology we were already rolling out and already had put in place. So we were going through that cultural change with our force and our staff about how they would be utilizing that technology. It does take a bit of time. It does take a lot of energy to get people into that space. But what's happened through this period is that it's been accelerated. So people have become much more open to utilizing the new technology. They've become much more understanding that why we're doing this now. So it's been easier to roll out and easier to implement than it would have possibly been had we not been in this situation. The new norm is a good issue. We don't, I mean, what is the new norm? We're not sure yet in terms of what the new norm is, but what I would suspect is, and what we can be doing is utilizing our officers in a more efficient way. So for instance, when officers are on restricted duties for whatever reason, maybe because of physical assaults or etc., instead of them staying at home or not being able to function effectively, they could be doing quite a number of things at home through technology. For instance, taking witness statements, following up on victims, doing other activities that could utilize their times more efficient than it had been previously. The other thing we'll probably be doing in the new norm is accelerating some of the AI and robotics functionalities as well. I think Natalie was talking about robotics. We've already put in robotic systems for software maintenance and updates. So instead of people doing the updates and doing the updates on our software, the robot identifies what the software needs to do and then pulls it and pushes it out to all the computers and laptops that we've got in a more efficient way. And in terms of bodyworn cameras as well, just very quickly pick up Justin. One of the things that's interesting that we've got on bodyworn cameras is they're now linked by Bluetooth with our tasers. So if a taser is drawn, all the bodyworn cameras, not only of that officer, but all the bodyworn cameras around that taser, is automatically goes live and records. So we've got a full situational analysis of what's happened with drawing of that taser as well. Unfortunately, it's not the case in other places. So for other stops and searches, etc., that doesn't happen. But there is that possibility of utilizing the next stages of bodyworn cameras to make it even better in its usage and what we do with that information as well.
Just picking up on that point, Georgie, and it combines with Justin, without getting too futuristic, the real basic technologies hopefully will be embedded in this new culture. So, for example, and talking about things that could be done at home, classroom training. Now, don't get me wrong, police officers need to do a certain amount of training in person, of course, but there is a lot of classroom-based learning that could be done virtually. And I know that various forces were doing some of that before, but now realise how much more that could be done. So yeah, I just wanted to echo both of their points there.
Thank you both. And moving on to one of our next questions, we have one for the whole panel. So what's the panel's view on the role of voice recognition based data capture replacing physical keyboards, difficult to use whilst wearing PPE? So I don't know who wants to take that one first.
I mean, I'll have a go at it. I can't honestly say that I've given that much thought, actually. Voice recognition over keyboard. I suppose what we've seen here with COVID is exactly so. The part of the question there that's interesting is around the difficulty of use given PPE equipment. And that is something that I suppose historically we've not really overly looked at. So this is an example maybe of something that we hadn't looked at, and now we will. I think the application of it has to be more widespread for it to be taken a bit more seriously. I suppose, yes, at the moment, there is going to be a great importance for that. Yes, over the next year, there's going to be a great importance for that. Depending on how much effort needs to be put into that and the value of that in the post-COVID world will determine how seriously that's taken. I think that's always been on the cusp. That's a technology that I remember back from Dragon, or whatever it used to be called, one of the first voice interpreting pieces of software that was just frankly absolute garbage. But when the application becomes of more use, i.e. you free your hands. And I think there are a lot of use cases. I mean, policing is going to be that, to be able to file reports and notes verbally, one assumes, whilst you're conducting a piece of work, particularly if you're on the front line. I think that would be important. You know, we do a lot of work more closely with the prison system. I would say that would be of significant use as well. Specific to this technology, I'm not entirely sure I'm seeing as much done about it in the near future as is required, but it is a really interesting point about a needs must.
Thank you, Justin.
It's Tim from JSARC. I mean, I've been familiar and aware of voice recognition and other sort of voice transcription type services for a number of years. I mean, it is a fascinating area, but I think certainly from my experience with law enforcement going back a considerable number of years, there is a certain amount of cautiousness with respect to that type of technology, particularly when you're talking about evidential practices and procedures with PACE, etc. Notwithstanding the obviously significant amount of time and resource that could be saved in other types of policing functions, but that might explain why there's been a little bit of hesitance and caution with some of the more wholesale adoption of voice recognition technologies.
If I can come in there, George, we did try to do a digital interviewing, to try to introduce digital interviewing where the interviews are transcribed directly through by technology rather than by individuals. However, unfortunately, the technology isn't there. Well, we weren't very happy with the technology because some of the they couldn't recognize some of the different people's conversations, so it couldn't. For instance, the Black Country accent they wouldn't be able to pick up what the Black Country accent was. So the different accents of different people, it wasn't able to pick up, and therefore we weren't able to then utilize that. But that is something that we want to develop and want to look at as to how we can utilize voice recognition software to develop more efficiencies in our system and services.
Brilliant. Thank you, Wahid. Question for Marcus. Is the Home Office looking to expand the use of electronic monitoring tags for eligible prison population, immigration centres and for alcohol monitoring?
To be perfectly honest, I have not had any involvement in any of that work if they have done, and it's not something that I could comment on. And once again, I don't know if Tim's aware of anything from more of his side that he's been looking at, but it's not really my area of expertise. Tim, I'll pass it to you if that's okay.
I thought you might try and do that, but I'm afraid, like you, Marcus, it's not an area I've had extensive experience in. So I think it would be better if we passed on that one.
What we can do is we can do a follow-up to that question as well, and then if we can loop somebody in that might be able to answer it, we can then include that in the summary or the follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the Home Office wouldn't be looking at monitoring of the prison population unless they were people on who have been released on certain special conditions and things like that. I would expect the Ministry of Justice to be looking at specific activities regarding tagging of prisoners, whether for security reasons or with their particular vulnerability.
So another question for Tim and Marcus is, Marcus, in your opening, you mentioned temperature checking technology. I'd be interested to know if, in your view, government are reviewing these solutions, if they might be pushing this out to police and other blue light forces to use in station and places of work, as there is significant interest from the private sector.
I'll take, Marcus, I'm happy to take this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shortly after we moved into the sort of the lockdown phase, clearly government departments and the Home Office being quite typical of that, we received a considerable number of offers from industry of technologies and capabilities right across the board to assist with the government's response to COVID-19. There were quite a few temperature checking technologies offered. They were being carefully considered by SAGE, the Scientific Advisory Group, being run by central government, by the Cabinet Office, number 10. And there is, again, a certain amount of caution because there is no evidence base in scientific terms that temperature screening is an effective means of detecting viruses on people travelling to and from, through transport hubs, etc. So there wasn't, the government, the response didn't jump to invest and go wholesale into the temperature checking as perhaps other countries have done. That said, as I said earlier, international airports, etc., are now considering this as part of a sort of wider activity to protect people and reassure people that their health is being screened. But obviously that in itself then raises questions of and activities. Should someone actually be detected or presented who does have a high temperature, as to what sort of response that that location, that airport, etc., railway station, then acts out. So as far as actually rolling it out to the wider emergency services, I imagine the National Health Service and the emergency services in ambulance terms would be able to measure temperature and would have other methods of doing some form of triage on people suspected of being seriously ill. I wouldn't know whether the police would be in a position to, or would necessarily want to engage with people who are presenting symptoms, and I think probably the first line would be to encourage them to actually return home and follow the current government guidance on isolating.
Thank you. I think we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. There's a good one here on sort of interoperability, which I'm sure everyone aware is sort of what techUK, the Justice and Emergency Services Programme, is looking at. So in terms of getting secure systems, sort of the interoperability, voice call, video call, how do we see this actually happening without a major organisation, for example, the Home Office, mandating anything for its stakeholder organisations? So just to add on to that, from a security perspective, the current policy of mandating conformance to certain security principles and allowing organisations free choice of tools is creating a range of individual secure systems without secure interoperability. It's quite a broad, interesting question, but I'll sort of hand over to the panel for whoever wants to jump in on that one.
I'll go on that. I guess I should probably take secure interoperability. So look, that one's always an interesting one because there's two ways of looking at that. You've got historically where policing and central government sits, which is a heavily mandated secure connectivity overlay. So let's look at something like the PSN, broken down, as a lot of people know, for PSN for policing, former Police National Network and CJX and all of that good stuff. And then each major central organisation kind of operates in a silo with its own views and its own accreditors. There is the opposite way that we have started to see is it's okay, as long as it's got a TLS wrapper, just throw it on the internet, which I think is equally a poor way of approaching this situation. That's not the solution for me. But what you do require is ultimately one set of mandate is maybe the wrong word, but one set of controls. It has to be more than guidelines that everyone ultimately adheres to and has to adhere to, but that gives them the freedom to do what they need to do. Now, I think if you have a centralized platform, so let's look at not the internet, but something that is far less archaic than the PSN, but you give the freedom to the organizations to do what they can do best with applications, services, that ultimately looking after their business at the edge. You keep this one platform in the middle, and as long as it's not too overbearing, everyone can move across it, then you're absolutely in a fine place. So I think, that's very easy to say and hard to do. You're trying to sort of get over 10, 20, 30 years of thinking there, but that's where we need to ultimately get to. It will not work if it isn't that. because if you've got things going on the internet, you've got differences. If you've got things going on the PSN, you've got things that take 10 years and nothing ever gets achieved. So it's where I think the next evolution of what people know as the PSN will go, which I think, unfortunately, it's not a wave of magic wand. It's going to take a bit of time. And by a bit of time, I mean a lot of time. And it's about how we navigate through that now. You know, myself and Neil, co-founder at Cloud Gateway, we sit on a lot of these advisory boards and are trying to shape that message. We think that that is absolutely the right way to go. And I think that the central agencies are listening. I think the GDSs of the world are listening, but it's about that balance, because the internet's very fashionable to be the right answer. It's not in entirety. So yeah, so unfortunately not a magic wand answer, but I think that's where it needs to be and where it needs to go.
Thank you, Justin. Does anybody else from the panel want to add anything to that?
Not other than the fact that it would be great if we were in that position where we had better interoperability across the even just the criminal justice system, even across forces. That might be better as well. You know, there's the whole point, and I'm not gonna. I know Home Office officials are on the call, but you know, most programs have had some significant challenges of being implemented. And at one point, I understand that 43 police forces with 43 accountability and governance frameworks and 43 ways of doing things isn't always easy. But we are slowly getting to a point where a number of forces are utilizing the same technology or the same infrastructure, which hopefully in the future will allow for better interoperability.
I think you're right, Wahid. We're seeing a lot more collaborative work, perhaps not nationally, but certainly at a regional basis. And I know that through the West Midlands and the East Midlands, there are some specific activities going on there which are showing a great deal of promise and hope for the future. Thank you.
And as we mentioned at the beginning, so techUK are obviously running the Interoperability for Policing initiative. So we've got a working group set up with some great techUK members sat on that group. We're always interested to hear from the rest of our members and also, of course, our key partners and stakeholders as well. Interoperability seems to be the sort of overarching theme across the majority of our conversations and a lot of the events that the JES programme has run over the last couple of weeks. So again, really interested in your views on this and happy to take sort of phone calls and any further questions after probably this event, as we've now run out of time. There are some questions that have been sent to me privately, but also broadcast to the group that haven't been answered. Apologies for this. What I will do is I will copy and paste them and send them out to our panel and get a response from our panel and send that out back to yourselves as well. So not to worry, your questions will be answered, and apologies that we haven't had time to answer them today. So what I think we'll do now is we'll just sort of quickly wrap up. But thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to my colleague Sabina and of course Wahid, Natalie, Justin, Marcus and Tim for your valuable input today. Some really interesting discussions which give me quite a bit to think about actually, so thank you. And as I mentioned, look, an overarching theme across the sort of JES programme is this idea of what our public safety services might look like, what technologies are available, readily available to support in sort of the frontline officers, and sort of what they do, you know, and how we can support our stakeholders and partners in delivering this. So we'll continue looking at sort of a lot of the key themes today, but no, just thank you from me and Sabine. I don't know if you wanted to say anything, but thank you for the really for the discussions and for our speakers for joining us today.
Just another thank you from me too. This has been very interesting. It's obviously not a kind of immediate focus area for me, but it's been one of the great joys of this project is to kind of look across the different markets and where technology plays a role and how it will play an increasing role as we come out of this. So definitely very, very interesting discussion. So thank you all, and yeah, have a great afternoon and weekend.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. Some great discussions, and we will speak soon.